are looking to find a donor, we can take her thoughts into consideration when doing that. So, Suzanne, would you take it away and please inspire us greatly this evening? Thank you. I think you might be on mute because we can't hear
Okay.
you.
I was on mute, I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, Bobby Reed, to this event. And I would like to thank Shoba for the lovely brochure she made for me, and Leisha too. I would like to say to you, I am a fellow Toastmaster, although I'm a fallen fellow Toastmaster. I pay my dues, but I have not been to very many meetings because of reasons and excuses. And I had no idea there was a Kidney Stories group. So I'm honored to be here. And I would like to sincerely thank you all. I am the author of The Reluctant Donor, a book about my family's 80-year history with kidney disease and my journey to become a living donor. When my husband and I were transferred for the 7th time to North Carolina, I began a job writing for the Charlotte Observer newspaper, and I was asked to do a story on Toastmasters. And while I was at that doing the interview, a little voice in the back of my head was niggling, telling me that I should be a Toastmaster because my little book was starting to gain attention and I was being asked to speak. I would much rather be in my yoga pants with a cup of tea in my office, my hair in a messy bun, than speak in front of a group of people. But I knew that what I had to say might help other people. So I did join Toastmasters. And the reason the book is called The Reluctant Donor, next slide, please, is because my maturity level is about that of a 5-year-old. And even now, as I'm older, I'm not very mature. My maturity level never stayed even with my chronological age. I really, really, and truly want you to know, next slide, please, is that I am a lot like the Cowardly Lion. Do you remember him in The Wizard of Oz as he searched for courage? He whined and he worried and he twisted his tail. I was terrified of hospitals because I connected hospitals with death because of my family's background with kidney disease. Let me tell you a little bit about my family. Next slide, please. I'm not going to tell you, don't worry about each one of these family members, but we are from a very large Irish Catholic family from the south side of Chicago. My mother is on the left in this photo, and she's holding my sister who has my kidney now, and that's me on the floor right below my mother, and terrified because my cousin next to me has a pistol in his hand, and he did become a Chicago cop. But I will tell you some of their stories. Next slide, please. My family has lousy kidneys, and perhaps some of you do too, and perhaps you love someone who does. And perhaps, like me, they are people you love the most. Next slide, please. Can you guess the answer to the next question? Obviously, some of you know it's B and D are the top 2 reasons for a person to enter into kidney failure. And of course, my family loves A, but the reason we have bad and lousy kidneys is because of C, polycystic kidney disease. Next slide, please. I know this isn't a very pleasant photo for you, but it really brings a visual to what my family suffers from. A normal kidney is about the size of your fist. A PKD kidney can weigh up to 30 pounds and be the size of a football. My cousin just had both of his PKD kidneys removed before his transplant, which is new. I'll tell you about that later. And his kidney, one weighed 24 pounds and one weighed 27 pounds. Next slide, please. This is a picture of my mother's family, and my grandmother is sitting in the front row. It was taken, oh, but what is it about this photo that lets you know that we are Irish Catholic from the south side of Chicago? There's a clue here. My grandmother is seated next to the Roman Catholic nun, and in the 1940s, when the photo was being taken, her kidneys began to fail. My mother is standing next to my grandmother in the white dress. She was 12 years old in this picture. When this was during World War II, when the world was raging with war. And at that time, most of you might know that a doctor named Wilhelm Kolff in the Netherlands was experimenting with orange juice cans, hoses, and a washing machine because of his frustration and anger at his patient, 19-year-old patient with failing kidneys, and he wanted to help. That was, as many of you might already know, was the beginning of an experiment that led to dialysis. Unfortunately, my grandmother died after the doctor said there was nothing more they could do for her. My mother was 17 years old. Her 3 brothers are standing behind her, and they were fighting in World War II at the time. And my aunt, the nun, was the first one of my grandmother's 6 children, first of 5 that developed the same disease. My aunt we called her Sister Mike, and I loved her more than almost anybody in the world. Next slide, please. My aunt was not your typical nun. She was silly, fun, and full of mischief. She called our mom Bubbles, and what kid wouldn't love someone that called their mom Bubbles? She was one of my favorite persons, and I was 13 years old when she died, and her death had a huge impact on me. Next slide, please. How did she find such courage? Because at the time her kidneys were failing, there was a waiting list for a dialysis machine. There weren't enough, and the cost of dialysis was not covered by Medicare. My aunt decided that someone who was a parent, a mother or a father, deserved her place on dialysis. So she took her name off so that they would have a spot. She didn't want the convent to go to the expense of paying for dialysis. She wanted the money to go toward the children that she taught. She died at the age of 45. Next slide, please. We found out after Sister Mike's autopsy that the disease was hereditary. And without all of my family's faith, courage, and humor, I would not be here tonight talking to you. Next slide, please. 2 years after Sister Mike died, my Uncle Jack began his battle with the disease. He needed to go before a group of people to decide if he was mentally competent to have a home dialysis machine. My aunt had to go with him because she was trained for 2 weeks on how to put him on the machine and take him off the machine. They had good insurance, and they were able to have home dialysis. Next slide, please. 2 years after Uncle Jack went on dialysis, my Uncle Bill started dialysis. He was an attorney in the state of Maryland, and he was self-employed, and he did not have good insurance, but he had good friends, and he was a member of the Knights of Columbus. So between his friends and his Knights of Columbus, his dialysis was paid for. But Uncle Bill didn't want to stand for being on dialysis. He had heard about this new thing called transplantation. So he went to put his name on the waiting list, and at Johns Hopkins, he received a kidney that gave him 6 more years of life, but he was warned that they did not know how much anti-rejection drugs to give him and that he had a risk of cancer. And he did die 6 years later of stomach cancer. Next slide, please. This is a photo that I took of my mother when I went to see her at the dialysis clinic. The year after Uncle Bill died, Mom picked up the cross and began her battle with the disease. And when I was at dialysis visiting her, she said, "I'm such a lucky duck. Because of medical science and the advances my brothers and sisters went through, I am here today. My dialysis is covered by Medicare." Mom did well on dialysis. She was on for almost 10 years, but at the end of the 10 years, she was beginning to fail, and the doctors insisted she put her name on the waiting list for a kidney. Now, back in the 1980s, the waiting list was nowhere near as long as it is today, as most of you know. Next slide, please. Did I tell you we're Irish Catholic from the south side of Chicago, where they dye the river green on St. Patrick's Day? We believe in angels, leprechauns, and miracles, and that was Mom's miracle. She enjoyed another 15 years of life with her new kidney from a deceased donor and a stranger, and she became an organ donor leprechaun, singing the praises of transplantation. After meeting God when she died, she said the first thing she wanted to do was buy her donor a green beer and tell him how much she loved him. I still get choked up about their stories, and I've told it a million times. Anyway, this is a picture of my sisters and I, and we had that 50% chance of inheriting the disease. And both of my sisters sadly inherited PKD. But my middle sister, the one in the picture, wants me to make sure I tell all of you that you will never see her again in leopard pants. But this is the first and only time I'm the oldest that I was taller than my sisters. They all grew taller than me. Next slide, please. My love of learning and reading and writing is from my aunt, Sister Mike. So I thought she would like the puns because polycystic kidney disease, sisters. So this is where we learned everything about courage, and both of my sisters have battled this disease with the same courage that Sister Mike showed. Next slide, please. Shortly after my mother's transplant, my youngest sister's kidneys were beginning to fail. Janice received a kidney the day before she was supposed to start dialysis, and we call that a miracle or a God wink. We've had plenty of God winks, and it's all about giving, the word of the day. Next slide, please. My mother received a kidney from a 42-year-old man. We all know this. My sister's kidney came from a 12-year-old girl, and I can't imagine the sorrow of the family. But when my other sister, Joanne, collapsed in renal failure in 2004, the waiting list had so many names, so many more names than in the 1980s and the 1990s. I knew her wait to receive a kidney would be 5 or 6 years, and I also knew completely what her life would be like on dialysis. And that is why an altruistic donor just brings me to tears. They don't know it as the way I know it, but still, that's when I opened my big fat mouth and said that I would give my sister one of my kidneys. So this is the headlines of the newspaper the day after our donation, which we just celebrated our 20th kidney-versary 20 years ago this past October. I love the picture because my sister's surgeon came into my hospital room and said, let me shake the hand of the lady who put me on the front page of the newspaper. So I was blessed that I found the strength to be able to do it and to donate to her. I was so frightened, as you all know. I just don't like hospitals, and I don't like doctors, and I don't like needles or the sight of blood. And I can't say on this nice presentation what my sister said when I told her I would give her one of my kidneys, but she basically told me there was no way that I would do such a thing, that I was too much of a coward, and she was right. But I did it, even though she told me all the time that I didn't have to do it. Next slide, please. No more dialysis. This is my sister, Joanne. Do you think she's happy? Sheer joy. And all of you who know what a transplant is like, who have been on dialysis, who need a transplant, you all understand the smile in her face. And I wanted to make sure I put this, especially because there's a few National Kidney Foundation people on this call. The National Kidney Foundation started the Transplant Games. It's no longer called that. It's called the Transplant Games. And I think this is probably one of the highlights of my family's battle with organ donation and kidney disease, is these transplant games. So I don't know how many of you know about them, so I wanted to make sure I included this slide. Next slide, please. This is the funniest picture. Again, it was all three of my sisters. They, between us, in the days that they had their transplants, the doctors did not remove their diseased kidneys because they were in too weak of shape to withstand that operation. And things change. All of us, I've been around transplantation for all these years, and things change. And so they had their native kidneys. So they each had 3 kidneys and I had 1. So this was just kind of a funny slide. I thought I would lighten the mood and show you. The next slide, please. There's a lot of things on this slide. I know there's probably too much for all of you to read. I don't want to go beyond my time, but I would not have a family without organ donation. So far now, since my book was written, there have been 11 transplants to 10 different family members, including my mother and sisters. Janice, my younger sister, received a kidney that 26 years worked for her, and then she developed polycystic liver disease, and she needed a liver transplant and received one. So that's why we have 2 to 1 person. We have had 6 deceased donors give life to 5 different family members. I can't tell you what that's like, to know that complete strangers cared enough to become organ donors to save my family. I was the first living donor in our family, and there have been now 5 different family members step up to the plate. My cousin, who is a priest on dialysis for 9 years now, he's in need of a kidney. One of his sisters offered to give him one, but his twin brothers needed transplants, and he said they were younger. You should offer one to the twin brothers. That's the kind of family I was lucky enough to be raised into. We have over 25 family members who have inherited PKD. And I forgot, we have one cousin who died while on the transplant waiting list. So this subject that we're talking about tonight at your Toastmasters meeting of kidney stories is very important to me and is very moving to me. It is very delightful that you wanted to hear my family story. and I would not be here without them. Next slide, please. For all of you that are listening, that are learning about kidney disease or learning something new, I hope I taught you. I hope you'll use all the resources that are available. I have served with the American Association of Kidney Patients since its founding in 1973. I used to type and stuff envelopes for them. So that's 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. Polycystic Kidney Foundation does the most research for kidney disease. I have, if you're a kidney patient and not a PKD patient, AAKP, I just can't sing their praises enough. They are a patient-run organization, and it is free to join. I've served on their executive board since 2013. They are just a group of amazing people who make you feel extremely welcome. And the National Kidney Foundation, I know we have some of you here tonight, which is another wonderful organization. I served on their Living Donor Executive Committee when they first started it, and their mentor program. And they're a wonderful group. I tell everybody, people ask me all the time, what should I join? Join them all. Be proactive. The other thing I was going to say is on the corner, the clinical trials. That's always something that I really, really suggest people look into. Next slide, please. I would like to dedicate this presentation tonight to my sister. Not going to cry. I mentioned she had 2 donors. She never complained. She had a prayer in her wallet that I didn't see until after she died. Never give up. Just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful prayer for a transplant recipient. You'd think I gave her a kidney the way she was to me for being a living donor. But she kept saying, it all worked out. It was meant to be. So I'd like to donate that. And last but not least, I would like to thank all of you for listening to my family stories. And I will bless you all. I've been thinking about, I'm sorry, I forget your name, the one whose nephew needs a kidney. I know for a fact that there are some transplant centers that do transplantation to 2 different blood types. I have a sister my sister Joanne, who has my kidney. She's very up on reading on everything, and she feels that is not the way to go, but I have no medical background. I don't know why she thinks that. I just said, so I know I'm going to be counted for having said, I just know that there is so much information out there if you just know where to look and where to ask questions. But as far as different blood types to a recipient, a different blood type, I would ask more at the transplant center. And other than that, I love meeting the 2 donors and the one, Mark, whose wife gave, and then the altruistic donor in New Zealand. I'm amazed. It's just been a pleasure to be here tonight, and I will stop now before I go over my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And I'm sure that many of us learned from what your journey has been and the giving nature that you believed in and followed through on, even when other people doubted you. I think that in the future too, you really should come back and join us and become part of our group here, because people do benefit and value your thoughts and your experiences and can take that and build upon them to help their own causes. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions on this, if you'd be wise enough here to put them into the chat, or you can message me. You'll see if you read through the chat notes that I included in there my contact information. And I believe that Mark Scotch also put some information in there too. For those of you who are in need of a donor or beginning your search for a donor, he has indicated that he's prepared